Hey, I'm Thailand, and today I'm going to show you how we built this stone fireplace. Disclaimer, if you're going to add a stone fireplace like this, make sure you get it approved by a structural engineer first. This is definitely heavy enough to be a significant load. Also, this is a gas fireplace, so I get asked about it a lot. Yes, it's hooked up to the gas line and it is vented out of the roof. Now, you can do all of that yourself if you want to. It's just not something that we wanted to mess with, so we actually hired an HVAC company to come and do the installation on that. So we got the electrical ready for them, so that was all in place. But they came out, they ran the gas line, hooked the unit up. Hi, Arlo. And then they vented it out of our roof. Again, if you want to, you can do that all yourself, but we just didn't want to mess with it. So we did the framing and the finishing work, and that's what I'm going to take you through today. Whoa! Oh! So we'll do framing and all of the stonework. Let's get started. The first thing I did was find the center line of the wall. I measured it from both sides a few times to make sure I had it right before starting on the framing, because it'd really be a bummer to get this placement wrong. Then I went ahead and mocked it up with tape, which is really helpful for visualizing the size and the shape of it before you start building. I'm going with the Heat and Glow Slimline 5X gas fireplace, so I just pulled the framing specs from their website and went from there. Once I had it mocked up, it gave us a pretty good visual of what it was going to look like in the room. I actually ended up going a little bit wider than this first tape mock-up because it seemed a little too narrow, but also keep in mind the stone veneer adds a few inches to each side. Alright, here we go. I started with framing the platform for the hearth. I used 2x6s to get it to the right height. We wanted a little hearth, but nothing like too overbearing, so 2x6s were just right. I used a speed square to make sure all the corners were squared up, and then I actually did add some corner bracing in there too, both to help keep it square and to give me a way to attach it to the floor. Now, in hindsight, I probably could have just taken out this baseboard in one piece, but for some reason, I had it in my head that I could somehow leave the sides on and work around them. I don't know, but whenever I'm removing baseboards, I wedge a taping knife behind the pry bar to protect the drywall. Otherwise, that pry bar will just break right through the wall. And as you can see, I ended up taking out those two other baseboards at the same time anyways. Alright, I'm going to move this box now. We'll go like this. Come here. We're just going to scoot it out of the way for a second. We're planning to redo these floors someday, but we couldn't quite swing it at the same time as the fireplace, so I came up with, I think, a solution so we can remove them eventually without having to worry about cutting them out around the stones. Honestly, I think it might be easiest for me just to cut this whole thing. So what I did is I cut the floors to the size that the framing will fit inside them, and then the stones overhang them a little bit so you can't see that cut edge. That way we should just be able to slide them out from underneath the stones. I guess we'll find out someday if that theory works. Okay, I started with framing this just as a box, but now that I'm thinking about it, this part's going to be the hearth, and then the whole face of the fireplace is actually going to come down right here. So I think I want to add an extra support in here, make sure that it's really, really strong so that all that stone coming down isn't too heavy on my plywood here. I used 1/2-inch OSB to top off the hearth area and then stacked a second 1/2-inch OSB board to create the platform for the fireplace unit. I had to add that extra piece to raise the fireplace high enough that it'll sit above the hearthstones and we can access the control panel with the gas lines and electrical, all that stuff. And now for framing the rest of it. So again, based on the specs and then how wide we decided to go with the whole thing, it'll be different for every fireplace. Once I framed all the walls, we set it on top of the hearth platform and secured it to the wall studs, then tied the sides and the front walls together and secured it to the roof trusses. You'll notice that the walls are just short of the ceiling. I've found that it's easier to get walls in place in existing construction if you build them a bit short and then use shims in the gap. It's really difficult to get them the perfect height and then be able to move them into place because they get stuck. So I put the blocking along the top of the header and then drive the screws next to them and into the roof trusses. Once the fireplace unit was installed, I realized that I needed to add some framing for the corbels under the mantle. I used pocket holes mostly because of those double 2x4s along the header over the fireplace. That would have needed longer screws to reach all the way through to the braces and I couldn't fit the drill. So pocket holes it was. Then I used my drill block to pre-drill for the corbels and make sure that everything was perfectly straight and level. There really wasn't a way to clamp the drill block onto the corbels, so I ended up just freehanding that. But I wanted to make sure to pre-drill them because we used lag screws through the back of those 2x4s to secure them and I didn't want to accidentally split the corbels. I wanted to focus mainly on the fireplace for this video, but I did put together a quick tutorial for how I did the corbels and mantle, and I saved it to my short videos. I'll link that in the description below if you're interested. They're all rough sawn Doug fir, and then I used a bandsaw to cut the curves for the corbels. Now for the mantle. I think we could have definitely just set the mantle on the corbels and it would have been plenty strong. Hindsight's 20/20, but I was worried about it at the time, so I added lag bolts to support it as if it were floating. It's fine, but I think given the size of the mantle, size of the corbels, how I attached everything to the framing, the lag bolts were probably an unnecessary headache, but this is how I did it. It was really tough to get it all lined up perfectly, and we may have had a small accident. Thank goodness it only ripped a very small part of the fireplace screen and nobody got hurt or anything. Ready for the cement board. Joseph rigged up the electrical so we can plug the TV in on the mantle and then hide all the wires. We have a frame TV for this spot since it's the centerpiece of the house, so it's built exactly for that. The frame TVs have a separate box that runs the TV to keep it as slim as possible. So there's an outlet there and then a port that we can run the wire through the fireplace and out the other side, actually, where we put the box inside a little console cabinet. He rigged up a heat shield back there so that the wires won't ever touch the chimney or have any issues with heat. The other thing that I've seen people with the frame TV do is they'll add like a recessed box behind the TV for the box to sit inside. We opted for this option in case we ever want to remove the TV. I just didn't want to commit to having a big box right in the middle of all that stone because that's a little trickier to hide than just the small electrical box.
Shocked myself. It was just really light. I haven't done it in a long time.
So there are a couple options for the backer for an interior stone veneer. You could either do OSB, then wire mesh and a scratch coat, or cement board. So I talked to a few of the employees at the fireplace shop where I got the veneer stone, and I asked them if there was a huge difference. They all said the cement board was just fine as a backer since this is inside and there's no concern about a vapor barrier like with exterior applications. So we went with the cement board. It was quick, just a one-step process and less mess.
It looks different already. It's just solid.
Now for some weird cuts. I used a masonry bit and cutoff wheel to make kind of those geometric cuts around stuff, but otherwise you can just score and snap cement board like drywall. Do keep in mind that you have to get different screws for attaching cement board. They're coated to prevent corrosion, so a good just kind of standard brand is Baccaron. And a perfect fit. Being totally honest with you guys, that piece was actually a perfect fit on the first try. Alright, we made it to the stone. Definitely a learning curve here to figure out how to work with mortar. It took us longer than I thought it was going to get the mix figured out, but we did have a few stones that fell down at the beginning, which meant the mix was too dry, and it just took us a while to figure out like how wet it needed to be. We're in a really dry climate, and I'm working on cement board, which is even more dry, so it had to be a lot more water ratio than I thought it was going to need. That said, what we ended up doing is basically going like too much water and working backwards from that. If it's too wet, the stones, they don't stick at all. Like they just fall off right away. If it's too dry, they'll stick. Well, they either won't stick at all or they'll stick for a while and then like a half hour later they just pop off like with no warning, which is kind of freaky. The other thing that has been helping is a spray bottle, and I've just been kind of lightly misting the cement board before I set the stones. I think the cement board is sucking a lot of moisture during the curing process. The first two corner pieces took a while to get on, way longer than normal since we were learning. We just didn't quite have the mix figured out yet, and they fell down quite a few times before we got it right. Luckily, no damage to anything. I am glad that we had all the paper and cardboard set up to protect the walls and floors. So we put paper on the walls, the mantle, the fireplace unit, and then both paper and cardboard down to protect the floors. It's just paper in this shot, but shortly after this we put cardboard down too, and I would definitely do that, add cardboard to the floor, because the mortar rips the paper pretty quickly and the floor gets a decent amount of mortar falling on it. The second attempt on that second cornerstone was a success, though we were not exactly feeling super confident in the project at this point. Can you pause the video?
First, will you tell the camera how it's going?
I think we have most of it recorded. It's not going great. But we got the hang of it eventually, and then it was time to rock and roll, so to speak. I mixed pretty small batches of mortar at a time. Small batches worked well, so it didn't start curing too much before I could use it. This is type S mortar. I got it at the fireplace shop when I picked up the stones, so I just did a few scoops of mortar in the bucket at a time, then added the water. At this point, I knew pretty well how much water each batch needed, but you can add a little bit more as you're mixing too to get it right. I used the trowel then to scrape mortar up off the bottom of the bucket as I was mixing. I'd mix it for about 10 minutes, let it sit a couple minutes and start to set up, then mix again for a few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, to make sure that the mortar had soaked in all the water. With stone veneer like this, it's a random pattern, so it's standard to work from the top down. You start with the corners, then fill in across the middle. I did a few corners at first, and then we worked across, but after that top section, we put on the rest of the corners all the way down the fireplace before we filled in across the rest of the front and the sides. It was quicker to knock out all the corners at once. Now, I know it seems a little counterintuitive to work from the top down. You could start at the bottom and go up, but the issue is you'll end up with a bunch of mortar on your stones, and since it's veneer stone, you have to make sure to clean it off right away, because any sort of abrasive that could clean it off once it dries will also take off the veneer and it'll wreck the stone look. So starting at the top, you don't have to worry if any mortar drops since there isn't anything below. It also helped to use a trowel to scrape off any mortar that squeezed out the bottom of the stones as we were setting them. And after each stone was secure, I used a damp sponge to wipe off any mortar that had gotten on them from our hands. You're probably wondering what those random 2x4 blocks are in the dead center of the fireplace there at the top. Those are the mounting brackets for the TV. We went that route since we knew we were building this to fit the frame TV and we wanted the least amount of interruption in the stone as possible. I've also seen people do it with a piece of plywood, which is hidden behind the TV, but we wanted to keep it minimal in case we ever remove the TV. This way we can just fill in with a couple stones and make it blend. I will say it was really helpful to have one person on the ladder and one on the ground to hand things up so we didn't have to keep climbing the ladder up and down. We just took turns while Joseph was able to help. There were a few tricks to cutting the stones and hiding the raw edge. The inside of veneer stone is just cement, so once you cut it, you can see that from the side. A cutoff wheel really worked best. I cut partway through the stones and then just broke it the rest of the way with a hammer. Then used the claw on the hammer to break off extra pieces, and that kind of gives you a nice ragged edge like stone. I planned it out so my cut edges would face towards the middle of a section of stone which hides them, especially with the grout all the way to the faces. But even if you don't grout all the way to the faces, you can cut at a bit of an angle so it's angled back into the surface of the fireplace, which hides it nicely. So for example, along the front, I cut all those stones that are right next to the fireplace, the ones that surround it, but I set the stone so that the cut edge is in the middle of those side sections and the nice finished veneer side is exposed around the fireplace, which you can see here. Same thing on the sides of the fireplace, but it wasn't quite as tricky because I could face the cut edges either towards the inside or towards the wall, just had more options, and every now and then one would fit perfectly and I didn't have to cut it at all. Out a few stones ahead of time so that once I get the batch of mortar mixed up, I can just move my way through each of the stones. So I'm just picking them out and then labeling them with a piece of tape and numbered so I know where they go. And that's just because I'm a little bit slower. Obviously, this is my first time doing this, so it does take quite a while to pick your stones out, and then just getting it on the backs and everything, I'm not moving as quick. So having them ready to go just cuts down on the time so that the mortar doesn't start to set too much. Once I have my stone, then I'm just loading up the back of it. This is about what the consistency of mine looks like. I think the general rule of thumb is that you can scoop a little bit on, give it one of those, and then flip it upside down without it falling off. So that's what the other videos showed, and then the guys at the fireplace shop, that's what they were saying too. So then just spread about a half inch on the back of each stone and kind of cleaning up the edges here as I go. All right, so I have about a half inch along the whole back of the stone here, so it's ready to go. The other thing I would mention, the bucket, it's not ideal for working out of, but again, this is my first time doing this, so I didn't get the big flat pail for the first project, and just one project I figured it'd be fine working out of a bucket. But at the risk of stating the obvious, yes, the bucket is a little bit of a more pain in the butt. Okay, so then I'm just gonna bring it over here. I misted the cement board with the spray bottle a little bit ago, so it's already got a little bit more moisture in it. This is ready to go, and you're just gonna press it into place, give it a little wiggle, and then you hold it for about, I don't know, 30-ish seconds. These bigger ones I hold a little bit longer just to make sure they're really suctioned, but you'll feel it kind of pull onto the board, and then it just holds it there. It's crazy. It boggles my mind how it works actually. Just like suctions it right into midair. Okay, you'll feel once it's pretty set, and then I just kind of slowly let the pressure off. Then it sticks. Try to kind of clean up on the bottom here. Just a little bit. And I can reuse that because it's not too dry or anything. For the hearth, I did the same process as the rest of the fireplace. I started with the corners and then filled in along the front and the sides. Cutoff wheel makes another appearance for the hearthstones. The cutoff wheel really is like the MVP of this project. On the hearthstones, I cut them much deeper than the rest of the stones to make sure they broke perfectly straight when I hit them with the hammer. Then I cleaned up the edge a little bit. These hearthstones called for a 3/4 inch bed of mortar, troweled every 3 inches. So I did that, then I set the stones, gave them a little wiggle into place, and adjusted them until they were level. Last but not least, grout. Oh, the grout. This was a tough part of the project. With stone, you use mortar as grout. Just mix it with a little bit more water so you can pipe it into the gaps. I was looking at fireplace inspo online, and I found a tutorial from Chris Loves Julia for how they had overgrouted a fireplace. I'll link that below, but I loved the color combo. They used white, large stone and tile mortar from Lowe's, and then mixed it with a bit of cement dye to warm up the color so it wasn't quite as stark against the stones, which looked really nice. I just did pretty much the same. For the amounts I was mixing, I used 2 drops of charcoal and 4 drops of buff cement dye per batch. A little bit goes a long ways. The whole grouting process was messy. It took a long time. There's a lot of gaps there, so my hands were so sore, but this is when it really started to come to life. To get the over-grouted look, I piped the grout into the gaps until it was even with the surface of the stones, and then I used a wood shim to smooth it down. I just worked in small sections, so I'd pipe 1 bag of grout and then smooth that section down, then go mix another bag, do the next section, etc. Again, you want to make sure to clean the grout off the surface of the stones as you're going here so that it doesn't dry and wreck the veneer on them. I used the sponge to clean up any of it that I didn't want on the surface, but then I did leave it around the edges of each stone to get that nice overgrout kind of soft look. And that's all there is to it. All I can say is thank you to the masons everywhere, because this is an incredible art and craft. It was quite the endeavor. Thank you guys for hanging out with us today and watching this whole project come together. It was definitely a learning experience. There were some times in the middle of the project when we were questioning our life decisions, but as per usual, it was worth it. We're so excited with how it turned out. It just completely transformed this whole room. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to answer them as best as I can. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you next time.